My first question has to do with how we actually define listening. We are here in this Listening as Witnessing Symposium. We've been discussing over the course of the last 3 days different understandings of the term witnessing and tacitly taken on board different approaches to listening. My question is, how do we define listening? So I would like to ask our 3 speakers here, how do you define listening in your research and practice? And to make this a little bit clearer, are there any particular contexts where you find this definition to require further support? So how has your concept of listening been shaped or modified through particular experiences and encounters, maybe personal or collective, oral or other experiences and encounters? And we can start maybe linearly, unless someone would like to take the first step. I can invite Panos Panopoulos to start with this question.
Okay, thank you very much, Danae. Hello, everyone. I'm really happy to be here with you today. I'm really sorry I missed the whole symposium, actually, because I was in Lesbos until yesterday night. But it's really a great pleasure for me to participate in this, not round, but okay, round table. Of course, with this first question, we got straight into deep water. I don't think I can easily give a definition of what listening is. Perhaps I could say some things about not how I define listening as well, but what listening has meant in my research and to what I've done through the years. I am an ethnographer and anthropologist, so the first thing that I would say is that my work, as I consider it to be, in terms of research and writing, has to do with different ways of listening and trying to find out different points of listening, as opposed to points of view, I mean. So through my research and different projects through the years, what I try to do is to try to find out these different points of listening in different contexts and realize what listening meant for groups, communities, in different cases which I studied. So trying to understand how other people listen and what listening means to them. And just to give you an introduction to what I have done, and perhaps we can return to these projects through the discussion, through the conversation. I will refer, first of all, to 3 projects. Perhaps I will add some others during the development of the conversation. One of my first projects had to do with fieldwork in a village of shepherds, and I concentrated on, focused on their use of animal bells and what it meant for them in terms of everyday work and in terms of symbolism. And I very soon realized that for them, the sounds of bells are voices. So already this rang a very big bell for me, in the sense that something that I didn't have in mind, that a sound of this kind could be recognized or perceived or appreciated as voice. And the relation then of bells with persons was something really intriguing for me. Let me stop here for the first project, and then I moved to a work with deaf people. Not because I was interested in issues of disability or other kinds of things that through an angle through which somebody can study deaf communities or so on, but I was interested in a different phenomenology of perceiving, of perception, of the senses. And especially I was interested in the relation of deaf people with sound. So what does it mean to have a relation with sound beyond hearing? That was the main question of that research. And in that sense, somehow I approached a way of listening which was beyond hearing. So I think we can talk about listening beyond hearing, something that has to do with sound, of course, but it doesn't reflect on the standard way we usually perceive sound. And that was the main, let's say, point of this second research. And the third project on which I would like to refer to had to do with mediated sound. In that case, I worked with a colleague and friend and an artist who is also an avid record collector. And at some point, he talked to me about a collection of records, acetate records, lacquer records from the 50s, sent by a Greek migrant in the United States back to his village. And then we started kind of ethnographic artistic research, trying to bring the voices back to the people. And then in that case, I had to somehow take into account that there are different ways of listening in terms of histories of listening or histories of listening. Because there was on the first place the way sounds were perceived, the voices of these recordings was perceived in their original kind of context of perception, but also there were other layers added when we returned to the village to play the records for the family, and then we used this material for an artistic performance. So these are three different ways of involving or somehow connecting a way to define listening with what anthropologists are doing in the field. And I gave just one example, but in several examples I could talk a little bit more about, in the development of the conversation, a little bit more about the relation between research in anthropological terms and artistic work. Thank you for it.
Okay, many thanks to you, Panos. And we move on to Brandon.
Okay, thank you. Hello. Thank you, Danae, for this question, this very essential question that, of course, has many answers. So, as myself, as someone working as an artist and researcher, very much, I think, for many years, moving progressively into kind of relational practices, so very much concerned with questions of community and understanding practice as something that involves others. So I think for me, listening really emerged in that context as a very vital, essential capacity and practice in itself. So I think, to define listening, I think for myself, I would say that listening is for me, understood as love. As love. So I'm going to pursue this position. And another way to understand love could be understood as radical hospitality. Maybe this is more digestible for you, more conceptual. Radical hospitality, yes. So, and this very much, of course, is again like how, in what way do we involve ourselves in others? In what way do we seek ways of collaborating that in a way can also really be transformative? So I think to explore or to be curious about that transformative potentiality of collaboration, I think requires something along the lines of love. And here maybe I draw upon a wonderful book called The Communism of Love that I would recommend by Richard Gilman Opolsky. And here he basically poses love not only as a highly personal experience, but as a public power. As a public power. And he would say that love is, to love is to participate in others becoming something they are not yet. To participate in others becoming something they are not yet. So of course this is very much about putting oneself out there and about being involved in others that is transformative, I would say, not only for others, but of course for oneself. So love as a power, I think, is really a kind of key perspective when I think of myself as a practitioner involved in listening. So listening, I think, can be understood then as a force that nurtures and deploys this power. Listening as something that deploys the power of love, as a transformative capacity to be involved with others. And here we might really appreciate Simone Weil in one of her essays. If we think about listening more along the lines of attention, how we give attention to things, she says that attention is the purest and rarest form of generosity. So I think we're already getting quite close to love if we think about radical hospitality, even radical generosity. To embrace this, maybe as also something that could be thought about as to live by way of the heart. Yes. And I think there's probably a million songs we could quote to understand the power of that position, to live by way of the heart. So I think I try to practice by way of the heart, I think. But this is also, I think, something that we can understand as a tension. Love is not easy. In fact, if it is a power, it is also a struggle. And it's also can be extremely interruptive. So to be involved in others is to also live along the lines of relating to interruption. And I mean that in terms of how our subjectivity is shaped by others. Yes. So I think love is also about that subject position of being exposed, being placed within a framework that one is continually interrupted. And this maybe finds an interesting reference in Achille Mbemba. I had an opportunity to see him lecture some years ago in Cologne. And throughout his talk, which was very complex and very inspiring, he ended up sort of finishing by saying, we need to have the courage to listen. And he said, the courage to listen to the stranger who is at the door. So that interruption, the stranger that knocks at the door, to have the courage to listen to that, I think there is something about, for me at least, love as that power that allows us to have that courage. So here I would sort of pose that as a sort of entry into a definition. And maybe just to back that up with a few experiences that have brought me there. I think one fundamental experience that I have increasingly found myself going back to is the experience of, as an early teenager, of being in a band. So, and maybe people who have played in bands may understand this story, which, as a young teenager, very typical story probably, music really became what kind of saved me, what rescued me from, of course, all the challenges of entering into the social and finding oneself, figuring out one's identity, but then moving into playing music and being in a band, which I was fortunate enough to experience with a very dear group of friends who were all equally going through the same challenges. So we were 4 boys playing music together in the garage. And this really, the band really then for me became a second family. Yes, the second family. And that really taught me a lot about building family, and understanding how sound and listening really participate into that possibility of building family. So, and I think within that there was also clearly a moment or an element which I think back now, which had a lot to do with love. the way that this second family became so powerful and so important in terms of an emotional bond. And I think as 4 young boys confronting the challenges of the social order around us, I think this also taught us to be emotional, to relate to our heart, which I think as young men, it's not so easy, yes. And I think the band and the emotionality of that musical production and the community that surfaces around bands in terms of playing in clubs, in terms of that extended community, is really emotional. It's a very emotional, passionate thing. And so to play, to practice by way of those emotions, by way of the heart, also really, I think, informed how I approach practicing. So there's that, and then I think for myself, moving progressively then into teaching. I have found myself very involved with teaching over the years. And, teaching is also another way of being involved with others. And I think teaching, for me, over the years has progressively become a practice of love. And Paulo Freire once said, teaching is an act of love. And I think he's very insightful and correct. Now, of course, it's not always about love. It can be, of course, very challenging. It's full of complications and tensions. But still, I think to be guided by that as a principle has been really helpful for me. And so those, I think, 2 experiences have really informed that definition of listening. If we think how listening is so fundamental also within spaces of learning and learning situations. So these are some things I wanted to share and to offer. Maybe there's also another side to your question. I think you asked us about those contexts that are challenging or that need other kinds of support. And I think for myself, I find myself challenged by, I don't know, I was trying to think about this morning, and the thing that came to mind maybe, and maybe requires some deeper reflection and discussion, but I find myself a bit challenged when I'm in spaces that are very patriarchal. Yeah. In terms of being able to follow listening as love and the capacity to really nurture and foster that kind of power. The only thing I feel sometimes is this challenge around patriarchal contexts, or where I feel there's a certain dominating patriarchal framework around me. So I want to, of course, there's more to say about that and what that is exactly, but I just wanted to share that for now. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Brandon. I think we were already gathering a set of very important spaces to explore in a little while. Anna, would you like to share your thoughts on what listening means for you?
Yeah, I have to say that I kind of came to listening not so much from sound studies, but from a musicological oral history approach that has taken me further and further into this listening and sonic and acoustic events. So my work and my practice focus on listening within social and political contexts of conflict, of detention, of displacement and war. So I will talk a bit about my listening practice, and that has been shaped by the experience I have had interviewing people who have suffered, who have experienced torture or severe trauma. And by this, I don't mean the bureaucratic process of applying or, getting ethics approval, but the thinking that goes behind it, and primarily about the decision of how to position yourself as a listener with people who have experienced or may still be experiencing a great deal of suffering. And so my kind of practice of listening doesn't so much rely on a truth-seeking in when I go enter these situations, but more as a kind of an open process of listening and acknowledging the experience of these people, and kind of being very attentive not just to the words but also to the silences, which can be often very extensive, but also to the contradictions. Like you enter there not as an interrogator or somebody who wants to, find, kind of point the contradiction, but someone who listens and perhaps at unexpected moments asks more questions just to be sure if a question or something was understood, and then try to listen on your own after this field process to understand what this may mean. So it's a kind of a process, how can I say, that is informed a lot by theory on trauma studies and about this reparative potential that is entailed in the process of witnessing, this idea of unaddressability and responsibility. And that is very important to how I understand listening. So listening for me is a process for allowing the others to tell their stories as unmediated as possible, to acknowledge their experiences, but it is also a process that entails reciprocal dialogue and a response. And the response doesn't particularly happen at that point, because I think I enter there more as a silent listener. I try to be as absent as actively, attentively listening, but my presence to be secondary. But that process of the response is the response comes later, either in an academic text or in an artistic work. And I have to say that my engagement with this research and these processes of listening, the listening of the others, of sound torture, music torture, or of conflict, and my own listening of their experiences has pushed me to a more artistic practice in an attempt to understand better, but also respond in ways that engage people more openly, puts these experiences out in the public space. And it is also, I think, a way of sublimating a not so easy research or listening process. It's a listening process that can leave you quite damaged at points, quite affected. Maybe damage is a strong word, and I think now I'm more experienced, but in the beginning I think it was it definitely had a strong effect on me. It wasn't easy. You kind of live with the stories, you live with what you're listening them constantly. And to make that distance, I think I find the artistic practice, it sometimes it's easier, not easier, it's more successful in putting a distance than text. Maybe because it's also shared more collectively. And I think that's, this idea of sharing with others and perhaps add something to that's more, has an impact. So, what else did I want to say? You asked about the challenges, and I want to say two things. I won't dwell so much on this new research because I spoke to, but I find that in this new research about Cyprus and conflict, listening to the conflict and secret conflict, which involves me as a subject, I found myself trying to listen to my memories. And to understand the disappearances and that was a very not easy but interesting process with regard to how I understand listening, and also talking with other people. It made me think of listening in terms of conflict in particular as a kind of a space where we meet and we tell our stories or listen to one another, and often our stories are very painful and very contradictory, and we are there with enemies, like proclaimed enemies, or be they from the same community or from the other community, But this space somehow allows us to, by listening to each other, creates a space for pushing forward a reconciliation process, which for me is very important. And I find that easier to give space of understanding to the Turkish Cypriots than to give space of understanding to the Greek Cypriots, who are on the opposite side than me politically. Something that was quite challenging, because it was easier to talk with Turkish Cypriots about these different understandings of histories, but when I took some interviews by people who were tortured by the British of the anti-colonial struggle in the 50s, but who was actually, let's say, implicated also in the violence themselves, I found myself more intolerant within me. I didn't express it, but I struggled to kind of, I'm still struggling with that. And maybe I'll say a little bit later about that, but I just leave it there.
Okay, this has been already, for me, very, very informative and also, solves a number of question marks in my mind. Particularly, I mean, coming also from music studies and historical musicology like yourself, Anna, I've been thinking of listening, as the opening up of a space that allows us to reconcile maybe differences and areas, that may not even have been tackled or even imagined before. But at the same time, listening comes from a rather loaded background, especially in music-related disciplines, and also disciplines that have to do with history. And when the two coincide, we tend to think of listening mostly related to comprehension, to the clarity of communication that comes with understanding, for instance, particular words when learning a foreign language, and that came up yesterday during the walk. There's this definition of listening that has to do with comprehending and having a noise-free understanding of exactly the meaning of every word in a language that is new to you and that you have to prove that you have learned. And this also goes, not just in terms of learning a new language, but also maybe learning how to master, let's say, musical skills. So people who come from this kind of background, we have to somehow communicate and cooperate with understandings of listening that may have to do mostly with the mastery of a vocabulary, which is something very different to this idea of listening as love and the allowance for an emergence of difference that has been addressed so far, and to broader definitions of listening.